Welcome back to another episode of Better Than I Found It, the podcast all things college golf. You're listening to Mike McGraw, the men's golf coach at Baylor University. My guest today is my uncle, Ronnie McGraw, who was a longtime club professional in the state of Texas and later a valued employee at the Ben Hogan Company. Now, sadly, the Ben Hogan Company officially closed its doors just a couple of weeks ago. It's a sad day in the golf business, in my opinion. But anyway, Ronnie was a valued employee there at Hogan for a long time. He was also my dad's youngest brother, and the family lived in Abilene, Texas, growing up in the 1930s and 1940s. Ronnie and I discussed his days as a junior golfer at Abilene Country Club and the incredible players that were his main influences early on. Guys like Billy Maxwell and Don January, both of whom would go on to win multiple times on the PGA Tour. In fact, Billy won the 1951 U.S. Amateur, while Don won the 1967 PGA Championship. Ronnie, who also served as the head professional at Brownwood Country Club from 1964 to 1979, would eventually land a job at the Ben Hogan Company, starting there on October 6, 1980. He held several positions at Hogan. He did just about anything they asked of him, but he cherished the opportunity to work in the model department and was instrumental in the designing of clubs at Hogan for several years. While Ronnie was with the tour department at Hogan, 3 players won major championships using Hogan equipment: Lee Janzen, Tom Kite, and Mark Brooks. Ronnie also talks about his relationship with Gene Sheely, who many in the industry consider to be one of the all-time best in club making. I hope you enjoy this conversation with a good old boy from Texas. Ronnie is one of the good ones. All right, Better Than I Found It listeners, let's give a big special welcome to my uncle, Ronnie McGraw. Ronnie, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, good talking to you, Mike. I was looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, you know, just last week on the internet, I saw that they officially closed the doors of the Ben Hogan Company. So it got me thinking a little nostalgic. And I thought to myself, you know, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. But also, it would be a great opportunity to have you come on here and talk about your life in golf, your life at the Ben Hogan Company, actually. And just, you know, you're my dad, one of my dad's brothers, so I've known you for my whole life. But let's talk about growing up in Abilene, Texas, Ronnie. That junior golf out there, quite an experience.
Yeah, Abilene holds a special place in my heart as far as Abilene Country Club and your municipal right across the fence where Billy Maxwell and Bobby Maxwell grew up and learned how to play golf, and went on, both of them went on the tour. But anyway, Abilene is a long time ago.
Well, it is a couple of years ago. In fact, when you think about it, Abilene, Texas was a small West Texas town. Abilene Country Club, you and my dad, Gervis, grew up there, but there were some great players that came out of West Texas in those days. And I'll just mention a few and you can talk about them a little bit. But Billy Maxwell, who won the 1951 U.S. Amateur, Billy went on to win 7 times on the PGA Tour. He was top 5 in the Masters, the U.S. Open, the PGA. Don January won a PGA championship in 1967. He won 10 times on the tour. He came from West Texas. Don Cherry, who was a famous country and Western recording artist, also played the PGA Tour and was a great amateur golfer from West Texas. But Abilene was a hotbed for junior golf and amateur golf in those days.
Yeah, it seemed like, you know, the Texas players, they learned how to play in the wind, and the golf course, most of the golf courses did not have really very great watering systems. So the ground was kind of like cement with some buffalo grass growing out of it. And anyway, once you learn how to hit off turf like that and play in the wind, I think it made you a better player.
I definitely agree with that. Talk about those great players in West Texas, but one of them that came out of Texas was a guy named Ben Hogan, who you eventually went to work for at the Ben Hogan Company. Before we get to talking about that, Ben Hogan to you and my dad was sort of like Jack Nicklaus was to my generation, or Tiger Woods was to the last generation. I mean, when you were a kid, obviously you didn't have golf on television every weekend, but you did know about Ben Hogan. I mean, he had to be like a hero for your generation.
Yeah, and in fact, my dad took me to my first Colonial when I was 12 years old, 1948. And Dad asked me, he said, "Who this being your first Colonial, who do you want to watch?" And I said, "Dad, I don't know who you're going to watch. I'm going to watch Hogan the whole round." And that's back in the days that you could follow right behind them. So you really got a view of where they were aiming. And of course, Hogan on Colonial, he knew exactly within 3 feet where to hit it in the fairway for the easiest shot to the pin. And that's back in the days that actually, you had the old balata ball which you could work. And the ball these days, I mean, you can hit it straight, but you can't work it. And even tour players have a hard time working it. And anyway, we followed Hogan the whole round. Hogan was playing with Ed Porky Oliver and Ed Fergal. And Hogan shot 67 that day, 3 under, but he hit the hole another 5 times, that he should have made most of them. But anyway, no, that was my first experience watching Hogan. In fact, the practice range was a small practice range back then, and so they let the player actually go out on the golf course and hit balls with a shagger. And we went over on number 11 where Hogan was and watched him hit balls, and we were like 5 or 6 foot back of him watching him hit balls. And I told Dad, I said, after a while, you'd think that would get old hitting the ball that straight.
Well,
yeah.
So it's funny. I talked to Lindy Miller on this podcast within the last year, and Lindy was talking about, a lot of people think it's exaggerated stories and hyperbole, but that man absolutely had a command and a control of a golf ball like no person ever has.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he was interesting to go into, but I always hated to go in and talk to Hogan because I was afraid I was going to come up with the wrong answer. And it just scared me to death, And Sheely said, "Well, you better get used to it," because he said, "You're going to take over. You're going to go up there." He said, "I have to go up there every day, and I'm not going to do that much longer. And so you better get used to talking to the man because you're going to have to do it." And it scared me to death.
Wow.
The tour players, we'd have tour players in and we'd make golf clubs for them. And at the end, I said, "Would you like to go up and talk to Mr. Hogan?" And they said, "Oh, no, I don't want to bother him." And I said, "You would not be bothering him. He loves talking to you guys. That's the only way he knows what's going on out on tour, other than me telling him."
Wow.
And so,
Well, that's
Hogan. I told Sheila, I said, that man tries so hard to be just one of the boys, and I said he'll never be one of the boys. And Sheila said, "Yeah, you're right. He'll never be one of the boys."
Huh. Well, that's interesting. You mentioned Sheila. You're talking about Gene Sheila, who may be in the history of club making. He may be one of the great masters at making golf clubs, wouldn't you say? Tell me about Gene Sheila.
Yeah, Sheila came from Kenneth Smith, and I don't. Sheila never made it through the 7th grade, actually, but when it came to golf clubs, he was a master. And any time you can satisfy Ben Hogan, and when we take things up to Mr. Hogan, his fingers were like calipers, and he could tell. He had his grips set at 530, and we used actually fishing line for the strip down the back of it to get it set at 530, and we made a fixture. We finally had to make a fixture because what we were doing when we'd put a set of grips on for Hogan, he would always find 2 to 3 that he'd say, this is not at 530, and this is not at 530. So finally, Sheila made a fixture where you could put it in that fixture and it would cock the blade so that when you put that string down the back, it was exactly at 530. And I remember taking the first set into Mr. Hogan, and he picked up one, and he picked up another, and then he picked up another. And when he got through the wedge, he looked up at me and he said, "How'd y'all do that?" And I told him, I said, Sheila finally figured out how to make a fixture that would cock the blade to where when we put the grip on, it'd be at 530, and he said, "I got to see that." And so I walked him down to the model shop and showed him, and every set I took up to him after that, he never looked at them.
He trusted you at that point.
He was satisfied, and he never complained again about one being wrong. And so that's
tell me this.
Story.
I'm gonna get your opinion. So a lot of people think of Ben Hogan as old school, and he was, obviously, but he was always looking for a new innovation, something to make the game better, something to make club making better. He was always looking for improvement. And I had one of my players a few years back tell me, well, you always talk about Ben Hogan like he was some godlike figure, but I said, he understood the game and the golf swing and golf clubs as well as any player that's ever played. He said, well, he wouldn't use TrackMan, would he? And I said, yes. And I said, yes, because I think Hogan, if he knew it was an advantage, he would use it. Do you think he would use today's modern day technology for his benefit?
Yeah, Hogan always was about 10 years ahead of everybody else. When they came out with the cavity back,
right?
I asked Sheila, I said, it's funny, Gene, why someone hadn't come out with something like the cavity back before. And he said, Hogan did it 10 years ago. And I said, you're kidding me. And he said, no, I'll show you the model. The model was the 99 model that Justin Leonard played and did so well at. And we called it a channel back because it wasn't cased in at the toe and the heel, and so we called it. We didn't call it cavity back. We called it a channel back, and Mr. Hogan did it 10 years before anybody else did, and Sheely would keep saying every year, Mr. Hogan, don't you think we ought to think about coming out with this club? And he said, no, I don't think they're ready for it. So
he was waiting until the market was ready.
Hogan was always thinking down the line, and but we used to on models, they make 2 models a year. Everybody does now, and back then we had a model for 4 years.
Yep.
And usually 4 years, and then it went back to 2 years, and then all of a sudden golf companies were coming out with 2 models a year. Well, Hogan never was going to do that because they didn't have that big a piece of pie, I guess, and we couldn't afford to.
Right. Well, you were talking about the cavity back. Let's talk about the first time it ever happened in the golf industry, and that was a cavity back forged golf club, the Hogan Edge. Talk about the Hogan Edge. What influence did you have on its design, and talk about how it changed the Hogan company?
Well, tell you the truth, we couldn't, that factory we had there in Fort Worth, we couldn't make enough of the Edge. We sold more than we could make. And so they farmed out to Arnold Palmer's company to make them in Tennessee, and they made a lot of the cavity backs there. But we sold that first year, we sold 70,000 sets, and that broke every record at Hogan, because the Apex would, they would maybe do 100,000 a year, and so it was something new and good.
Yeah, and
we just couldn't make enough of them.
Well, that's a good problem to have, Ronnie.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Hey, I'm going to ask you a question. So the Hogan Edge came in and ran its course, but unfortunately, a very sad day happened. I think it was in 1993 when the Hogan company sold and they moved the factory out to Virginia. So take me through that process. And you actually went out to Virginia, but you came back. Tell me about that.
Well, in fact, when they were they were moving up there, so they were laying off and firing that day. I remember it like it was yesterday, because everybody, the girls were crying and everybody was losing their job. And if you got your name called over the loudspeaker, that meant you're next. Anyway, my boss called me over on the loudspeaker, to come to his office, and I looked at Sheely and I said, that's me. And I said, I'm gone. And he said, I don't think so. And I said, I hope you're right. And so anyway, I go up there, and he said, Ronnie, come in, shut the door. And I thought, boy, that's not good. And anyway, he's kind of jockeyed around and him-hawed around, and he said, hey, we can't get rid of you. I said, why? And he said, you touch too many bases. He said, you take care of the tour, you work in R&D. And he said, you know how to do everything in the factory, and we can't get rid of you. So they out of 300 employees, they only took 21 to Richmond.
Well,
and
you were one of those.
I was one of them, but the players wanted me to stay in Fort Worth, and so the CEO at that time for the other company, the bowling company, he said, no, Ronnie can stay with Sheely here, and they can work on models here, and he can travel to the tour out of Fort Worth and Dallas easier than he can Richmond. And it was expensive flying out of Richmond, Virginia. And anyway, that's how that started. And 2 years I stayed down here with Sheely before I had to. They called and said, "You've got to come up here because we're doing some different stuff with some models and everything, and we need you up here." And so I had to move up there. I was up there for 4.5 years before they let us come back down.
You were, if I can say so, you were a fish out of water in Richmond, Virginia.
Oh yeah, I told those people, look, I said, I'm a Texan and I don't belong up here.
Well, if my memory serves, they moved you back, gave you a raise, gave you a model shop, and you were in Fort Worth working on golf clubs again.
They let me move back, gave me a $20,000 raise, and that's the biggest raise I ever got. Worked at a golf company, and so we got to stay up here, and then of course we moved right across from Tom Kite there. He was working. He had started a company and was working and going over to Taiwan and doing all of the model. They started doing all of the models. See, back when Sheely and Hogan were the only two in R&D at one time. Mm-hmm. It was just two people, Hogan and Sheely. And anyway, they moved us to right across from Tom Kite, and then that's where all of that kind of started. And Tom Kite and I were at that time was working on the 90, I think it was the 99 model that we were working, the Apex. That was the one that we had more tour players playing that wasn't even on our staff. And anyway,
well, Ronnie,
that's kind of where that went.
Right. Well, now I'm just going off my memory, but I remember 3 guys for sure on the Hogan staff winning major championships. That was Tom Kite, Lee Jansen, and Mark Brooks. Are those correct? And did others win majors with Hogan equipment?
Yeah. We had John Cook, was one of our players, Mark O'Meara, and Don January was the only senior tour player we had playing the golf club, and of course he lives in Dallas, and we did a lot of over a period of time, and of course part of that time, Lee Trevino was on staff for Spalding, and anyway, we did all of Lee's work for a lot of years, and yeah, it's Mark Brooks. Mark Brooks, he was there every day. People, I'd have a pro say, "What's a good graphite shaft for?" And he'd tell them how he wanted it to load and everything. And I said, "Hell, go over and ask Mark. He's here every day. He knows where they're at better than I do."
You know,
Mark was and is a smart player, and he knew more about golf equipment than probably any tour player out there.
Yeah, I actually got to spend a couple of hours with Mark last week. He was at a junior golf tournament where I was recruiting. He was watching a player, I think, that he teaches, and we had a great talk, and we talked about you, and he knows a lot about the golf clubs, that's for sure.
Oh, he really does. And I would learn a lot from him because he was out on the tour more than I was, and he knew, because he spent every day at the golf course, he knew the newest and the best. And all you had to do to find out what was new out there is just ask Mark. And I would. I fed off him a lot. He's a smart guy.
Yeah.
And a nice guy. And a nice guy too. He was, I mean, I had more time talking to Mark than probably any other player I ever had.
So Lee Janzen, he won at least one U.S. Open playing your equipment. Did you have spend a lot of time with Lee as well?
Kite probably. I probably worked more with Tom Kite than any other player, because he was first player that was signed when we were bought out by the Japanese. He was first player that got a 10-year contract playing golf, or playing for that company, and won. And that was unknown up to that point. So we worked more with Tom, and he was our premier player at the time. And, a good story about him, when we did the three wedge system, and I had gone up to show some wedges to Mr. Hogan, and I said, Mr. Hogan, what do you think about the three wedge system? And we're doing this for Tom Kite and blah blah blah. And he said, if you need more than one wedge, you don't know how to hit wedge. And so anyway, I said, Lee Trevino came in that afternoon. I was telling Lee about it, and he said, yeah, hell yeah, you just open it, and you took a regular pitching wedge and made sand wedge out of it, and gap wedge, and but anyway, Hogan didn't think much about three wedge system.
Well, Ronnie,
too many golf.
I understand. So you work with a lot of tour players, but I'm going to ask you another question about modern day tour players. Who are your favorite players to watch today, and why?
Offhand, that kind of impresses me. Naturally, your player Ricky, everybody just likes Ricky and pulls for him. I told him, I said, well, my nephew was his coach, and anyway, so no, I think there's a lot of good players out there, and naturally, Tiger Woods with what he did, and I told him, I said, if you go to stats with Tiger and the rest of the field, he outputs them like 10 shots in 4 rounds.
Yep.
And they're right up there with him, but he outputs them every day. And I said, that's where the game is. And so, of course, at Hogan, that's one thing Hogan did not do good, is he did not design good putters. And anyway, Sheila used to say, yeah, he come up with this crazy looking thing he drew on one of those napkins out at Shady Oaks, and he said it's just crazy looking. I said, well, what are you going to do about it? And he said, I'm going to let it sit there and hope he forgets about it. And if he so anyway, we never tried to bring up the subject of putters to Mr. Hogan, because he come up with some crazy looking putters, and none of them worth the shit.
When I was Ronnie, when I was 10 or 11, he came up with a black putter, odd little hosel called the Sinker. Do you remember the Sinker?
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're talking about the what year was that? I was trying to think. Remember what year that black putter came out, and I think we had like 3 models of the. God, I can't remember.
That's okay. Now. That's okay. It's just he did not make good putters. That was for sure.
No, he had nothing to do with that putter. In fact, he had nothing to do with any of the putters models. Everything. I think we put some out there that he designed, but I mean they never went over, and so it was just, I think that was just pacifying Mr. Hogan. We got to make 1 or 2 that he's designed, because he's Mr. Hogan, So anyway, Sheila was funny there. He said, I just let it sit there, and then if he doesn't bring it up again. So anyway.
Well, Ronnie, I have another question. Are you playing any golf these days?
Yeah, I've had 2 heat strokes, so and it's been so hot here. I mean, we're breaking records here, and I can't play. Even if I went out there daylight, I still wouldn't be able to make it around. No, I still play golf. There's nothing wrong with me, and I'm getting around, and still chasing women and stuff like that. So I'm all right. As long as you can chase the women, you're all right.
Well, I think you're pretty correct about that, but don't tell my wife, please. Okay. Well, Ronnie, listen, it's been great talking to you today. Just getting, 1, to catch up with my uncle, but number 2, just getting some really good stories about you and the Ben Hogan Company. So thank you so much.
Okay, I've enjoyed it, Mike.
All right, we'll talk to you.
Good luck with your team this year.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Ronnie.
Okay, boy.